Bow your heads, please.
Dear Jesus, thank you for this day. Thank you for our day at Heed. And thank you for Ms. Brady's coming down and teaching us. And I hope we have a wonderful class and a wonderful rest of the day and a wonderful distinction. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, ma'am. Okay, hopefully everybody's got their test out. The first word there, everybody got it out? Is exoskeleton. You should have said something about a skeleton on the outside of the body. A single eye, something about an eye with one lens. Open circulatory system, something to the extent that the blood flows directly on the tissues. Statocyst is a balancing organ. And gonad is an organ that produces gametes, or a reproductive organ, you could have said. Number 2, A is antenna, B is carapace, C is swimmerets. Did anybody get anything different there? Okay. Okay, number 3. A is stomach, B is heart, C is pericardial sinus.
Oh, sorry.
What, did I do something wrong?
No, could you just say that again?
Sure. A is stomach, B is heart, C is pericardial sinus, D is anus, E is nerve cord, F is digestive gland, and G is green gland. Did anybody get anything different that you want to ask me about? Okay. Number 4. Got to turn the page, don't I? Why do arthropods molt? So they can grow. Something about growing. Number 5, what 5 characteristics set arachnids apart from other arthropods? You should have listed that they have 8 legs or 4 walking legs, 4 pairs, 2 body segments, or you could have actually mentioned the cephalothorax and the abdomen, no antenna, book lungs, and 4 pairs of simple eyes usually. Okay, for the next one, you're supposed to give the 4 characteristics of insects, and that would be 3 pairs of legs. You didn't have to say walking. 3 pairs of legs, wings, 3 body segments, and 1 pair of antennae. Okay, number 7. What are the stages of incomplete metamorphosis? You should have said egg, nymph, adult. Number 8, what takes the place of respiratory system in insects? You could have said the trachea, and you might have mentioned the spiracles, but you definitely wanted to mention the trachea. Okay? Or you could have described them. You could have said that there's little tubes going in and out through them. Okay. Let's see. Number 9, if an insect has horny wings that protect membranous wings, to what order does it belong? I would say Coleoptera. And number 10, if an insect has leather-like wings that protect membranous wings, to what order does it belong? And that's Orthoptera. Now, each answer is worth 4 points. That means every answer on the test is worth 4 points. So start from 100 and subtract whatever you missed. We are starting into phylum Chordata, and this is where we find vertebrates. Most of us think of animals. When we think of animals, we're actually thinking of vertebrates. We think of kitties and puppies and horses and birds, and maybe you're into snakes or lizards or turtles, whatever. But most of us think of vertebrates when we think about animals, because that's what we can relate to. But we've seen there's a lot of animals that aren't vertebrates, aren't there? That's what we've been studying up until now. So what sets vertebrates apart are that they have vertebrae, which are individual bones that together make up a backbone. Okay, so vertebrae actually are individual pieces of bone that fit together, and then they make up the backbone. The spinal cord runs through the backbone. There's holes in these. I don't know if you can see it, but there's holes that the spinal column actually, the cord runs through there, and then there's room for nerves to come out in between them. And what goes between these pieces of bone is cartilage. And if you've ever heard of somebody saying they slipped a disc or they damaged a disc, these are discs of cartilage, which is, here's cartilage, okay? Cartilage. It gives more, and yeah, you see, so you can feel it. It's hard, but it's flexible. And so there's pieces of cartilage called discs between these vertebrae, and that's what makes it so we can bend and do things, okay? But when one of those slips out and the 2 vertebrae hit one another, it gets excruciatingly painful. And that's why people that have slip discs or any of that stuff walk around like this, or they don't walk around at all, and they end up having surgery. So it can be extremely painful. Anyway, so a vertebrate has vertebrae, which are the individual pieces of bone that make up the backbone. Now, not everybody in Chordata is a vertebrate. There are 3 subphylums in phylum Chordata. What is the thing that they all have in common? What do all things in phylum Chordata have in common? It's not the backbone. Didn't get that? Turn the page and see if you can figure it out. What do all of those subphylums have in common?
Dorsal nerve cord.
That's a good guess. That's a good guess. That's not what I'm looking for, but that's a good guess. Flip back one page. What's the next word that's defined on that page? Notochord. Do you guys see notochord? Yeah. What do all chordates have in common? All chordates have a notochord at some point in their life. They may not have them forever. But if you're in phylum Chordata, then you have a notochord at some point in your life. So the next thing we want to ask is, what's a notochord? And it tells us there it's a rod of tough, flexible material that runs the length of certain animal's body, providing the majority of its support. Now, we have notochords, vertebrates have notochords during our embryonic stage because they're made of cartilage. Okay, so they're flexible, but they still hold a certain shape, don't they? And so that's showing you a notochord in a cephalochordate, which is a creature that actually keeps this notochord throughout its life. And it looks kind of similar to a backbone, doesn't it? But it's not made up of pieces of bone, and therefore it is more flexible. Now, if you flip the page, and you are absolutely right, Catherine, they all have dorsal nerve cords, okay, that go along with either through the vertebrae or along the notochord, which is, and the notochord provides protection for it. On page 394, we get to subphylum Urochordata. Once again, I just wanted to show you another notochord. This actually shows you the notochord in a mouse embryo. A vertebrate has a notochord, but only in the embryonic stages, and then it develops into a backbone. And this is actually a tunicate larva, which is what we're looking at right now, which is a cephalochordate. A tunicate, oh, there's one more notochord. Can you see it right here? It almost looks like a spine or a backbone. This is an African lungfish, which I'm going, what is that? But anyway, it shows you the notochord. It does not turn into a backbone in certain, well, you guys read about sharks. Sharks are chondrichthyes, which means they're cartilaginous fish, so their backbone could be considered a notochord because it's not actually bone, right? Okay. Anyway, so the first one is urochordates. I'm sorry, I said cephalochordates. It's a urochordate. Urochordates have a notochord in their larval state, but then they lose it. And the example here is the sea squirt. And I'm not even sure if there are any other urochordates or if sea squirts are the only urochordates. I'm really not sure. It's not something you hear much about. But this is the larval state of the urochordate, and notice it has a notochord at this point in time. But then the sea squirt turns into one of these. They're kind of pretty, aren't they? They come in all sorts of different striking colors too. They really do. And what they do is they squirt water. So they're called sea squirts. I like it. But anyway, and so the larva actually attaches to the bottom and goes through this metamorphosis and turns into one of those pretty things that we just saw. And notice the notochord actually turns into its outer covering, and that's thus the name tunicate, because a tunic is the covering that a Roman soldier used to wear. And so you've heard that before, haven't you? Have you ever heard somebody's got a tunic on? That's where a tunicate comes from. It's got like a leathery covering on the outside. And so the tadpole-like larva actually turns into the sea squirt. Now it tells us there that the nerve cord and the notochord are recycled into new tissue to make the tunic, so that I guess they have the nerve tissue in that tunic so they can respond. These guys, like a sponge, siphon water through their body and expel it through the top opening, which is the, the oral opening is where the water comes in, and they expel it through the atrial opening, which is on the side, and they filter out little particles of phytoplankton and zooplankton similar to a sponge. So they are filter feeders. Let's see, are we supposed to know anything else about them? Let's look at the top of page 395. On your own, 13.1. If the sea squirt feeds like a sponge and stays fixed to a surface like a sponge, why isn't it classified in phylum Porifera? Yes, sir.
Because it has a notochord.
It doesn't have spicules or sponge.
Good. It has a notochord. It doesn't have spicules. It's not full of pores. It just has two openings, one in, one out. Shoot, we have one in and one out. We're not sponges, right? I mean, so you're right. So there's a lot of things that's missing to be in that phylum, but I like that it has a notochord as at some point in his life, whereas a sponge doesn't. Outside of filter feeding, it's got nothing in common with the sponge, does it? That's about it. 13.2. What structure in the adult sea squirt performs the function that the notochord performs in the larva? What'd you get for that? Somebody else. Zach's already answered one. Somebody else has got to pick one up. What'd you get for that one? What provides the support for the sea squirt once it's an adult sea squirt? Good. The leathery covering. Absolutely right. Thank you, Emily. Okay. Then we get to cephalochordates. And cephalochordates, that's a model of a cephalochordate. That's not a real one. And it's showing you the notochord and the dorsal nerve cord. And it's got the pharyngeal slits, okay, or the pharynx with the slits. And this is its little mouth with the little things at the edge. Hang on, I'll show you in just a second. I'm going to show you. These guys are a marine creature called Amphioxus, and they taper at both ends and look something like an eel, but they're only about this long. They're usually about 3 inches long. They spend the majority of their life buried in the water. It takes up food by filtering out the phytoplankton and the zooplankton once again. It says that the water is first filtered through the oral cirri, which is pictured there, which is its little mouth, okay? And then the large undigestible pieces will be cleaned out there. And then it passes through the pharynx, which is shown there. And the food particles are trapped in the slits of the pharynx. And that flows down to the atrial cavity, which is pictured in the picture. And then eventually it all leaves through the atrial pore. So it goes in one end and out the other, like we've seen before. Then it says that if you go to Discovery Bay in Jamaica, biologists have reported that populations of 5,000 lancelets per square yard are in the sand. So I wanted to show you that's what they look like. That's a lancelet, and they're down in the sand. And if you take him out of the sand, there's his little oral cirri. And if I were in Jamaica Bay and put my foot down and saw 5,000 of those in an area this big, I would be so out of there. Okay, I don't know about you, but that would freak me out. And I've had a student that's been there and told me there really are that many. That if you have your mask and snorkel on and you put your foot down, they're everywhere. And I was like, whoa. And then the other part that kind of freaks me out, but you guys know me, is that there are people in certain parts of the world that eat these things. Okay. I will eat seaweed. No problem. Don't think I'm going to do these unless I'm starving, though. So, anyway. Okay. 13.3. It says a dead lancelet is to have large particles of sand lodged in its slits of its pharynx. What most likely was not functioning properly prior to the lancelet's death? Yes, sir.
The oral series.
Good. The oral cirri. That's right. Thank you, sir. Okay. Then it is cirri. I'm just going to say, because when their eye's just hanging out there on the end, we say a long eye. Okay? Good. I know, those things confuse me. I'm there. It's like nebula and nebulae, and so. In subphylum Vertebrata, which are vertebrates, they have an endoskeleton. Now, you already learned that an exoskeleton was a skeleton on the outside of the body, so guess what an endoskeleton is? It's a skeleton on the inside of the body, right? That's not hard. And so vertebrates have endoskeletons, and there's your vertebrates. They all have skeletons on the inside of their bodies. So we got all sorts of different types of vertebrates. We'll just use us for our endoskeleton. It gives us a bone, a cross-section of a bone on page 397. Which one was that? Did you hear? Did you guys hear a beep?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay. I got two cameras going, and I'm thinking somebody's freaking out here. Okay, that's fine. All right, so let's look at the cross-section of the bone. And I'm going to put one up here, but let's use the one that's actually in your book, okay? Notice on the far right-hand side of the one in your book, you have spongy bone tissue. The reason it's called spongy bone tissue is because it's got little holes in it. It's spongy. Does anybody remember why it was important that the bigger ends of bigger bones have spongy tissue, spongy bone tissue? Don't remember? It's to make the bones lighter. Otherwise, our bones would be so heavy we'd have a hard time moving them. We see a similar design in dinosaurs. Not only do they have spongy bone tissue, but when God designed like the dinosaurs, like the ceratopsian dinosaurs, which are like your triceratops that have the big frill behind their head, they actually had windows of bone missing to make that frill light enough that they can lift their head. Okay, so we see that as a design feature, and we'll come back to seeing that birds' bones are extremely light because they're full of these spongy areas, and they copy that in airplanes to make them light but strong. So the spongy bone tissue gives it strength without actually being too heavy. Then the compact bone tissue is just like it sounds. It's compact, so it's heavier, but that's real important because it's going to take the brunt of the force that the bone has got to put up with. And then it mentioned that bones are made up of collagen mixed with calcium salts, and that's what hardens them. And so when they don't have the calcium salts, we have cartilage. And there's cartilage at the end of each of our bones so that on the joints, the bone on bone doesn't rub together. When you have bone on bone, you have a really mean type of arthritis. I think it's called osteoarthritis, and it's very, very painful. So that cartilage is supposed to actually protect you and help you. Notice that a bone is living tissue. The outside edge of the bone is wrapped in living tissue called the periosteum. And O-S-T-E, osteo, okay, O-S-T-E-O, that means bone. So when you see that word with anything else, you know bone's involved. If you go to an osteopath, it's somebody that studies the diseases of your bones, okay? Pathology is the study of diseases, and osteo means bone. So when we have peri means around. So periosteum is the membrane around the bone. You can think of it like the skin around the bone. And there are blood vessels in it, and it brings oxygen into to the blood cells, the osteocytes, and it takes away waste products. So it's very, very important. If you break your leg or you break your arm, that bone is going to need a lot of extra help so that it can build new tissue, isn't it? And so it's very important that it's got this blood flow going to it. And then what do we call the hole in the center of the bone, the hollow part? Well, the stuff that's in the hollow part. Let's go there. Bone marrow. Very good. Bone marrow. And what is the job of the bone marrow? Something very important happens there.
Blood cells?
That's where our blood cells are made. And how well would we do without them? Right? We'd be dead. So our blood cells are produced in the bone marrow. That's why you might hear somebody that has cancer is having a bone marrow transplant. What they're trying to do is they're trying to stimulate white blood cell reproduction, because your white blood cells are your immune system, and they're made in the bone marrow. So the bone marrow is very, very important. Now, bones have three functions here that are listed. One is support. Have you ever seen somebody with a broken limb or an animal with a broken limb? Have you ever? They look like, whatever limb that is, looks kind of like a sack of fluid, doesn't it? If you saw them with a really bad break. I'm not talking like, I got a little fracture here. If you got a really bad break, there's no support in that limb, and the limb just looks like a bag of fluid hanging off of the animal or person. I've seen that in both cases, I'm sorry to say. And so the bones really do give support, and without it, you're not going to be very upright. The bones also, we just said, produce blood cells. Very important job. Without blood cells, we all die. Okay. Does anybody remember what the third job of bones is? What's a third job? They act as a bank account for something. What are they a bank account for? What are we supposed to do with a savings account? You're supposed to put money in it. When you need it, you take it out. Yes.
They hold calcium.
They hold minerals, and calcium is a mineral. That's absolutely right. When you're your age, young, your bodies are actually storing minerals into your bones. That's assuming you're eating correctly. And your body should be storing calcium and other minerals in your bones. And then when you get to my age, if your body is deficient in calcium or other minerals, it starts to suck it back out of the bones. And that's why people get osteoporosis, which means osteo, I told you that means bone. Porosis means holes, like the pores in a sponge. So osteoporosis just means you got holy bones, not in a holy, holy, holy way, in a holy way, like Swiss cheese, okay? So that's not a good thing, is it? And so a mineral repository is a very important job of the bones. And you want to have a diet that helps you to keep that mineral content up, and part of that's eating enough fruits and vegetables, believe it or not. And you might go, what does that have to do with minerals? Well, because when you eat proteins turn into acid ash when they're metabolized in your body. And so your body has to use minerals to buffer that so that when it goes out through your kidneys, it doesn't burn your kidneys and burn your tubes that come out of your body from your kidneys, okay, like your ureters and stuff like that. And so your body's busy pulling those minerals from wherever it can so that it can buffer your urine so it doesn't burn you on the way out. So if you eat a lot of acid ash producing foods, which are proteins, and I'm not saying meats are bad, because this could be grains, this could be even whole grains, organic whole grains, this can be beans. If you're eating too many acid ash producing foods, which are proteins, you can be a vegetarian or a vegan and be in this situation, is what I'm saying to you. If you're not eating enough fruits and vegetables, which is where we get our minerals, your body doesn't have the minerals to be able to take that pH and deal with it. So your body's not going to let that happen. Your kidneys are not going to let you burn your tissues as the urine goes out very acidic. So it'll start grabbing the minerals from wherever it can. And it'll grab them right out of your bones. Eat more fruits and vegetables. Do you know where else another place is that it'll grab those minerals? Out of your gallbladder. And that's what causes gallstones. And so people get gallstones and they let the doctor whack the gallbladder out, but they haven't changed what caused the problem, which was not eating enough fruits and vegetables. Because what your body does is it'll actually grab the fluids out of the bile that's being concentrated in the gallbladder. You read about that. The bile that's being concentrated in the gallbladder, it's full of minerals. So if your body needs to, it will grab those minerals out of there, and that leaves the cholesterol in its solid state, and it causes gallstones. So if you got gallstones, you don't want to just go whacking parts out of your body. You want to figure out what caused the problem and change it. Because if you don't, you are looking for a disaster. Those of you fellas that are athletes, or you ladies that are athletes, if you have an acid ash producing diet and then you go out there and you work out really hard, you can drop dead. And that's why you see these athletes and they go, we don't know what happened. His heart just gave out. Guess what happened? Your body can only stand so much acid, and then it stops functioning. So osteoporosis is caused by that. Don't go drinking milk to get rid of osteoporosis. It actually can make it worse. You want to eat more fruits and vegetables. Think of things you like. I'm telling you guys, I'm at a point in my life where I sit down with a plate every night and I'll peel a tangerine, throw some grapes on there, throw an apple cut up in there, throw a banana in there. Most people would go, how can you eat all that and lose weight? I can, because it's all fruit. And how much fun is that? After dinner, that's my dessert. I sit there and pig out on fruit. Yeah, you know? And it's good for you because it's full of minerals and stuff. And then when you think snack, think veggies. Eat carrots, eat celery, find veggies you like. Good broccoli. Organic broccoli is very good. If you've never tasted organic broccoli and you've only tasted that other stuff, that's why you don't like broccoli. I'm telling you that right now. And the same goes with the carrots and stuff. And try the organic ones. That's why the gourmet chefs use the organic ones. They taste better. And so if you don't like veggies, get some veggies you'll like. Get some organic ones. You might find you like them. But the organic ones also have a much higher content of the minerals that you need. Okay? So this mineral repository thing is really important. Just ask anybody that's got osteoporosis or gallstones. Okay. Gotta say something else here. It had some words here. I told you osteo means bone, and it had the word osteoblast, osteoblast, osteoclast. Aren't they close? Look at that, one letter difference. And osteocyte. Now, you guys know what cyte means. What's that mean? Cell. You said it, right, Megan? Cell. Cell. So an osteocyte is just a bone cell, right? An osteocyte is just a bone cell. Blast means growing, and clast means breaking it down. So if you have an osteoblast, it's making new bone. If you have an osteoclast, because you're going to see these, if you ever take anatomy, you're going to see these endings other places, okay? There are other types of blasts and clasts in your body. The osteoclasts break down the bone. Now, why would we want something to break down the bone? Well, number one, if you're mineral deficient, your body's osteoclasts are going to be breaking down bone to get that mineral out of there. But let's say you're a kid and you're growing. Your bone has to be reshaped. So the osteoclasts are busy breaking down parts while the osteoblasts are busy building up parts so that your bones can grow the right shape even as you're growing. It makes sense, doesn't it? And let's say you break a bone. Then the osteoblasts have to get in there and start building the callus and start rebuilding the bone tissue, and then the osteoclasts have to come in there and remove the callus once the bone underneath is fixed. And I just didn't tell you how a bone heals itself. But when you break a bone, let's say we broke this bone, okay, what happens is the body actually comes in and makes what's called a callus, which is a piece of bone that looks like a big old bandage. It's a bone bandage. Okay? And it builds a bone bandage around there, and then it will start to heal what's inside, because your body is set up to keep you alive. Okay? Doesn't really look down the road, this is going to hurt you. Looks at what I have to do to stay alive today. And so that's what's happening here. And so it'll build that callus, which is that bone bandage, and then it will heal inside of it, and that gives you time to be able to walk again and, you know what I'm saying, function again. And then the osteoclast will come in and remove that bone bandage, that callus, and the osteoblast will be busy building what needs to be built. Does that make sense to everybody? So you see the difference between these. So blast is making new bone tissue, and clast is tearing it down. Let's just see if I told you everything I was supposed to on that page. I talked about the cartilage. The cartilage is made up of collagen also, but it doesn't have the calcium salts in it, and therefore it is not as hard. Turn to page 398. Oh, that's just showing you bone marrow. If you've ever cut a bone. You know, it's funny, I never hear of this now, but our grandparents would actually take a chicken bone. You've seen this. You open it, they would take it, they would break it open like the long bone on a chicken leg, and then they would suck out the marrow. And that was a common practice, wasn't it, ladies, with older people from our, you know, the generation before us. Maybe, are your people from up north? Okay, southern. Maybe it's a southern thing. You've seen that before. Are you southern or Cuban or?
My grandma, she's from Nicaragua. She would always make it.
She's from Nicaragua. Okay, so see, this is the old way. You know why? People that were raised without a lot, that was a lot of the meat, was in the marrow. And so you see the older people in the South that went through the Depression, they're going to suck the marrow out of that chicken. They're not going to throw it away, okay? And it's probably like eating the liver or the giblets, because it's a matter of not wasting. Now giblets are things like the heart, the gizzard. Some people will just go buy that stuff, which freaks me out. Forgive me. I could be a vegetarian really easily, you know. I mean, I seriously could. I'd miss a good hamburger here and there, but otherwise, wouldn't bother me too much at all right? And And I like good chili, but I have to make it myself, you know. So anyway, so the marrow. And remember, that's where what happens in the marrow? What happens? Blood cells. Very important job, right? Very, very important. Okay, so here, excuse me. Here we see the jobs of the bone: support, blood cell production, and the mineral repository. Now, your book goes into the appendicular skeleton and the axial skeleton, and these sound really scary, so let's simplify. We're going to be simplifying a lot of stuff in this chapter. What do you say, okay? So, first, the axle of a car. Tell me something. What attaches to the axle of a car or a bike? The wheels. Good girl. Even the girls got it. Good girls. All right, you guys had it too, I know. All right, the axle is the central portion that everything attaches to. Look where the axial skeleton is. It's the central portion that everything attaches to, isn't it? Just like the axle on a car. So it's the skull, the spinal column, and the ribs. It's the central portion. Now, the appendicular skeleton, have you ever been told that your legs and your arms are your appendages? Ever heard that before? These are our appendages. Okay, what's the appendicular skeleton? It's your appendages. It's got the word appendage right in it, doesn't it? And so the appendicular skeleton are the arms and legs or whatever's hanging off that creature, right? Tail if it's a squirrel, you know. Okay, so that would be part of its appendicular skeleton. It's the appendages. This makes sense, right? Sounds scary, but it's so not. Okay, so let's go on to the circulatory system. We have a closed circulatory system. That means the blood never goes outside of the actual blood vessels. So the fish was the only closed circulatory system I could find, and we needed it later, so that's my picture for the closed circulatory system, is that it actually stays in the blood vessels. Now, all blood vessels that move away from the heart are called arteries. In our body, most of the arteries have oxygenated blood in them, but what is always true is arteries away. They both start with an A, don't they? Arteries away. The arteries go away from the heart. The veins actually come back to the heart, and usually it's deoxygenated blood because they're on their way back. What happens is, in general, that the blood pumps away from our heart and the arteries, it goes to the tissues, and the blood does not come in direct contact with the tissues, but it gets to the capillaries, which are very, very thin membranes on the capillaries, so that the oxygen exchange and the carbon dioxide exchange and the nutrient exchange can go right through that membrane to the tissues, but the blood is never supposed to leave that blood system. And what happens is the red blood cells, which you heard about and we'll come back to, are little pickup trucks that actually carry the oxygen to the tissues, and they get to the capillaries, they will dump the oxygen, they will pick up the carbon dioxide, they will dump whatever food products that need to be given to the cell, that they will pick up whatever waste products that the cell wants to get rid of, and then through the veins they go back to the heart and to the lungs and other places, and that gets rid of the waste. And we inhale oxygen, and our blood comes in, and the red blood cells pick up the oxygen. We exhale the carbon dioxide and water vapor that we learned about in aerobic cellular respiration. Remember, those were the byproducts? And so that's what's being brought back to our lungs, dumped out, and then the red blood cells pick up the oxygen again and go back and do their little pickup truck thing again. You saw that, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, good. All right, just making sure. All right, so arteries go away, veins come back, and usually the V that goes with the veins coming back are valves. See, when the arteries pump away, you've got the full force of the heart behind it, but on the way back, there's nothing pushing it, and so it can have a lower pressure pushing it. And so God put valves in the veins so that the blood doesn't, let's say it's coming up from your toes back to your heart, so that the blood doesn't backflush. There's actually valves in your veins to keep the blood from flowing backwards. And so when those valves start to break down, that's how you get varicose veins and problems like that, is those valves will start to break down. And the way to keep that from happening is high fiber diet, fruits and vegetables, and I should be selling fruits and vegetables, right? Okay, and then a lot of exercise, because the exercise is the only thing that helps to push that through, because your heart's already done its pushing thing. Okay, the blood is made up of a lot of different blood cells, but mostly red blood cells, which are shaped like that, because that's a really efficient shape. It's almost like a donut, but the hole's missing, isn't it? And this is what they actually look like under the microscope. They're very, very small. These are white blood cells, okay? My boss in cancer research would have said, you can tell because they're grungy looking. That was the word he always used. So the white blood cells, when you see them, they're grungy looking because they have a nucleus, and red blood cells do not have a nucleus. They're anucleated cells. They don't need a nucleus. They don't last very long. I told you, they're little pickup trucks. So they're not taking care of themselves. They're constantly being produced and constantly being destroyed. That's how it works. The protein in a red blood cell that actually holds the oxygen is called hemoglobin. Heme is referring to blood. Globin is referring to a protein. And so hemoglobin means blood protein. That wasn't hard. And hemoglobin actually binds with the oxygen, and that's what carries the oxygen to the cells. Okay? I'm trying to think if there was anything else you were supposed to know there. Oh. It says that sometimes it'll make the blood in the veins look blue and the blood in the arteries look red, but it's not really, it's always red. Basically what it gets down to is when blood is in the presence of oxygen, it picks up the oxygen immediately and it turns bright red. But when the blood is deoxygenated, it's still red, but it's kind of a dark red, and through our tissues it tends to look a little more bluish, just depending on what color your pigmentation in your skin is. And so that's why they'll distinguish the blue being deoxygenated blood, because it's easier for you to see which blood has oxygen and which blood doesn't. But we don't want you to think it's really blue, because it's not. Okay? It just kind of appears a little, well, you can look right there in my arm right there. You see how that vein looks a little on the greenish side, right? Can you see it? Can everybody see that? It looks a little on the greenish side. That's where people would get the idea that it was blue, but it's not. It's just a darker red, and as you look at it through the pigments, then it tends to look that color. But obviously if I opened it up, cut it or whatever, it would look red immediately, because the air comes in direct contact with the red blood cells and they pick up the oxygen that fast. But even if you could see it in a deoxygenated situation, it still would not. It would not be blue. It'd just be a kind of a dark brownish red kind of color. Okay? Yes, sir?
How did we figure out that it was a dark red then?
Oh, I'm sure somebody actually had to play with it and put it in a vacuum to see. Guaranteed. So, yeah. But they make it blue in the picture, so it's real easy to distinguish which blood is oxygenated and which blood is not oxygenated, okay? All right, turn a page. Then we get to page 400, and this is the typical vertebrate nervous system. And so notice there's a whole bunch of different vertebrates, but there are certain parts of the brain that we seem to all have as vertebrates. One is the olfactory lobe. Anytime you hear olfactory, you should think sense of smell. Just think that. As soon as you hear olfactory, sense of smell. Have you ever noticed that when you go someplace and something smells really badly, but you're stuck there for a while, eventually you don't smell it? A couple minutes after you got there, you can't smell it anymore? That's called olfactory burnout. And I've decided that that's a gift from God. Now, I know anatomically why that works, and it's got to do with the firing of the nerves, and eventually, if it keeps firing, your body says, okay, stupid's going to stay here, so I'm going to stop. Okay? It's the same reason if you stick your hand in hot water and it's, like, let's say you get in a hot tub. You ever gotten in a hot tub and thought, oh, it's really hot, and then you sit there for a few minutes, you go, it's not hot anymore. That's because the nerves keep firing, go, okay, stupid's just going to stay here, so I'm just going to give it up, and that's what happens. That's how I think of it. I know it's probably not that nice. Sorry. Anyway. But I think olfactory burnout is a blessing from God. And the reason I do is because it allows us to serve people that we wouldn't be able to serve otherwise. If you walk in a situation where somebody's homeless or an older person that really can't clean their house or can't smell what they smell like or whatever, and it makes you kind of nauseous when you first get there, but in a couple minutes you're not going to smell that and you'll be able to serve, won't you? That's important, isn't it? So I really see God's design in olfactory burnout because it really allows us to serve in places that we would not be able to otherwise. So I think that's very important. But anyway, olfactory has got to do with the sense of smell. So the olfactory lobes are very important. And in animals that have a pronounced sense of smell, then you'll see a larger olfactory system. Let's see, the one. So this is olfactory. So that's a bony fish. So bony fish can smell. Amphibians looks like like they might be able to smell a little better. Some birds can smell, some birds can't. It depends. Our olfactory lobe is small comparatively. Now, what's really large on mammals, not just people, but mammals, what's really large on mammals is the cerebrum. And the cerebrum, it actually said, was the lobes of the brain that integrate sensory information and coordinate. Oh my goodness, to coordinate response. You don't want to memorize all that. What I have here is receive information and coordinates response. Receives information, coordinates response. What does that mean? My horse looks and sees something running at it. It receives that information, and then my horse bolts in the other direction, and that coordinates the response. Does that make sense? My dog hears something. She receives the information, and then coordinates her response, right? Do you see what I'm saying? And notice mammals have a very large cerebrum. They are receiving information and coordinating the response. So there's a lot of thought going on there. Then you have the optic lobes. If you're going to the optical department at Sears, what are you doing? Eyes, exactly. Optic means eyes. So if you have a large optic lobe, you probably have a better sense of vision. And a smaller optic lobe might mean that you have a smaller sense of vision, depending on which vertebrate you're looking at. And then the cerebellum, it tells us, controls involuntary actions and refines muscle movement. So if there's an animal that you see that moves real funny, it might have a really deficient cerebellum. Okay? No, seriously, because it refines muscle movement. So that if your muscle movement's not functioning correctly, and it's also involuntary actions. Have you ever had a doctor take that little rubber hammer and pop you on the knee, and your knee goes, okay, that's an involuntary reflex, isn't it? And so those involuntary actions and muscle refinement, that's in the cerebellum. And then the last one, the medulla oblongata, actually coordinates vital functions, which means without vital functions, you die. So those are things like breathing, and circulatory, and things that you don't think about, they just happen, because without them, we die. Okay, got that. Now, it also mentioned, and this is worth noticing, that all of these have two lobes except for the cerebellum. The cerebellum only has one lobe. Everything else has two lobes. And for a while, they used to think that the right hemisphere of the brain took care of the right-hand side of the body, and the left hemisphere of the brain took care of the left side of the body. But they don't think that anymore. Now they say, no, the right side takes care of the left side of the body, and the left side of your brain takes care of the right-hand side of the body. And now they've gone even further. They said, well, the left side of your brain is analytical thought, logic, language, science, and math skills, and the right side of your brain is what we would call more artsy. Okay? Well, if that's true, then all left-handed people should be art people, and all right-handed people should be math whizzes and scientists. But that's not always the case, is it? So I don't like these major, putting things in a box and saying that's how it is. And they've actually found where these different areas of the brain code for which things, which can get very, very interesting. But once again, don't let it fool you. There are right-handed people that are very artistic, and there are left-handed people that are very mathematical. I'm married to one. He is the least artsy person I know, okay? But he's very mathematical, and he's left-handed. And I'm right-handed, I like math, but I love art. And I actually do some art. So you just can't go by that. And I found this on the internet. I thought it was so cute, because the left brain dominant is supposed to be real analytical, and the right brain dominant is supposed to be real artsy. And I thought, boy, that really says it. But don't be fooled by that. We are exactly the people God wants us to be. It also talked about that we have sensory nerves that bring information to the brain, and that we have motor nerves that actually take the information back out from the brain. So it shows you the picture there that if you saw the glass of water, the sensory nerves, you see the glass of water, and then with your motor nerves, you go back out and you grab the glass. Okay, so sensory nerves bring in the information, the motor neurons or nerves take the information back out to the muscles and make things happen. Just real quickly, when I was your age, they used to teach us that, let's say I touched something hot, that the information had to go up my nerves from my fingers with the sensory nerves all the way to my brain, and then my brain had to send back the information through the motor nerves to pull my hand back. They don't teach that anymore. Remember? They used to teach us that. They don't teach that anymore. Now they realize that that response is way too fast to go all the way here and all the way here. In our spinal cord, you have areas that are called ganglia, and just like the ganglia that you looked at in the the earthworm for his brain, we have ganglia in our spine, and now they say that the information goes to the ganglia, and when it's an emergency situation where your body needs to move, now, stupid, move, okay? Doesn't go all the way to your brain, thank you, Jesus. It just goes to the ganglia, and then the motor neurons go back, and it says, pull your hand back, or ouch, ouch, hot, hot, you know what I'm saying. So that's interesting. It's nice to know that. And then if this connection is severed, and you've heard this before, like Johnny Erickson taught us, some of you are familiar with her, Johnny and Friends on Christian radio. When she was 17, she dove into a place where she couldn't see the bottom, which your parents always tell you not to do, and she severed her spinal cord. And she severed it right in this area, and she has never been able to move again, and she won't be able to move until she gets to heaven and God gives her a new body. So if you sever this connection, anything below where that's severed doesn't function anymore. The sad part is, and I never realized this, you still feel the pain. She'll feel the pain for the rest of her life. And I was unaware of that. But she can't use those parts anymore. I know, isn't that sad? It's like the brain is saying that people that are amputees, they can still feel the pain in the limb that's been amputated. And they say they think it's because the body, the brain is constantly searching for it, and the brain doesn't understand why it's not there. And so it continues to search for it, which is, like I said, it's very, very sad. Okay, let's go on to the next thing. Below that is reproduction. Are we having fun? I hope we're having fun. This is more fun to me than earthworms. You'll have to forgive me. Okay. Reproduction. In vertebrates, the sexes are always separate. You have male and you have female. And if there's internal fertilization, then the fertilization occurs within the body of the female, that the sperm meets the egg in the body of the female. That would be the case with most land animals. There is also external fertilization, like in the picture, where the female drops the eggs out, and then the male comes along and he puts the milt, M-I-L-T, which has the sperm in it, over the eggs, and so the fertilization occurs outside the body. That is actually usually in aquatic animals, marine animals. You'd have to be in a liquid environment for that to work, right? Okay, so that's easy, right? The fertilization, internal fertilization occurs inside the body. External fertilization is outside the body. Turn the page, page 402. That's a lot more confusing, so let's go there. Okay, on page 402 we have the words oviparous, viviparous, and oviviparous. Oh my goodness, it's like they couldn't kill us fast enough, so they had to add to it, right? What we need to know is word roots, and this will save us. Yay! Parus means to bear, like to give birth, to bear, okay? So if you put ov in front of it, ov means egg. Oviparous, I'm going to come back over this again, so just listen for a minute. Oviparous means it lays an egg. It bears by laying an egg, like a bird or an alligator, right? They lay an egg, and that's where their babies come from, oviparous. If we change that word out for viva and put parus behind it, viva means life. So viviparous, I think it's an actual I here when we put it with the parus. Viviparous means it's live-born. It comes out alive. And specifically, it comes out alive, and it was connected to the mama by a placenta. In other words, this is oviparous, whether it be without a hard shell because it's in the water, or with a hard shell because it's a terrestrial situation. But either one of these are oviparous, egg-born, okay? And then, see, oviparous. There you go. And then viviparous. These are creatures that are born alive. I could have put shamu or flipper, okay? They are creatures that are born alive, but they were attached to their mama by an umbilical cord to a placenta, which attached into mama, which fed the baby. That's why creatures that are viviparous actually have belly buttons, because that was where they were attached to the mama. Make sense so far? So these are live-born with a belly button. You can think of it that way if you want to, okay? These are egg-born. So what happens when we put the two words together? Because that's what we got. Oviviparous. I hope I spelled that right. Ovo. This should be an O. Oviviparous, right? What that means is, are you listening? Don't read that. Listen. What that means is they have live-born that was from an egg inside the mama. You notice it's got egg and live-born together? It was an egg inside the mama, and then the egg hatched inside the mama, and the baby came out alive. But it was not attached to mama through an umbilical cord and a placenta. Ovoviviparous. Okay, does that make sense? And so examples would be guppies. You see baby guppies come out, but they are not attached to it by an umbilical cord, to a placenta. They were in little eggs inside the mama until they were hatched and came out. I didn't know chameleons, that's the situation. Or how about this snake? You see the snake giving birth to all these live-born babies? Rattlesnakes are ovoviviparous. They actually have the eggs inside and then they hatch, okay? And there's a seahorse that's ovoviviparous. Now I know the daddy holds the eggs for that, and that's a really strange story. The mama actually has the eggs, puts them in the daddy, and the daddy holds them until they're ready to be born, and then they come popping out of daddy. So, but those are ovoviviparous. Did that help with those words? So viviparous is live-born, oviparous is from an egg, and ovoviviparous is from an egg, but it's live-born. Okay, got it? Showed you pictures, you should have that, right? Now we're going to skip right over to osteichthyes because I need you to start on your dissection in just a minute. So skip right over and we will cover the other parts next week. On page 409, osteo means, I already told you this, it means bone. Ichthyes means fish. The ichthus is the Jesus fish, okay? So ichthyes means fish. So osteichthyes is talking about bony fish. Now, are you guys on page 409? You do have to know these parts and these pictures. You have to know that the fish does have a sense. Okay. Osteichthyes, what is bone about it is the skull and the spine. Not everything else has to be bone. The rest can be cartilage. That's why if you eat fish and don't break your teeth on the bones and they seem pliable, it's because everything else could be cartilage. But the skull and the backbone will actually be calcified and therefore bone as we think of it and being hard. They have a lateral line which allows them to determine movement in the water, so they can be sensitive to movement in the water. They do have vision. They have the operculum, which covers the gills. That's what your book was talking about. It talked about having the dorsal fins, the anterior and posterior dorsal fins. The caudal fin is actually its tail fin, okay? You will need to be familiar with that. The operculum is the covering over the gills. And remember, fish actually have to have the water run over the gills so that they can pull the oxygen out of it, put the carbon dioxide back, into the water, and that functions like our bodies do. But they actually have the operculum that open and close. You've seen that before with the fish. That pumps the water through their mouth, over the gills, and it pumps it out so that it can pick up the oxygen and dump the carbon dioxide and waste products in there as the water passes over the gills. Let's see. You also need to know about these internal structures, and you're going to be looking at today the gills. You'll be looking at its heart. It has a two-chambered heart. The atrium receives blood. The ventricle pumps blood. It's the same as our heart, but maybe there's an atrium in your church. The atrium in the church is where the people are received. The atrium in the heart is where the blood is received. Okay, same thing. And then the ventricles where it's pushed out. They only have two chambers to their heart in fish. The liver, oh my goodness, the liver has so many jobs. The liver, this was from a people's liver, but the liver takes care of immunity against infection. It has factories for proteins and cholesterol. It excretes waste via bile. It regulates blood clotting. It clears drugs and chemicals out of our system. It converts glucose to starch for storage, excess bile for fat digestion. Your book talked about the gallbladder, which was right here, and that actually concentrates the bile. Remember, you read about that. Here you have the air bladder. The air bladder is actually for buoyancy, to let the fish go up and down in the water. And I'll come back to that next week. If a fish is a female, you'll have a roe, which is a reproductive organ. The male, it'll look different. This doesn't have the pyloric cecum on there. The pyloric ceca, which is part of the digestive system, it'll actually kind of look like three fingers that if you pull them, they'll be thin and there'll be three fingers. Couldn't find a picture with that on there. You have kidneys. The kidneys clean the blood. The brain is up here. There's your fishy brain. Okay, best picture I could get you of a fishy brain. If you have time to dig that out, that's fine, but do it very carefully. I have had students that do it very well, no problem. I don't want any fingers being cut off because you're going to have to use a scalpel to do that. And let's see. Okay, we already did that. Oh, circulation in the fish. Okay. The fish's heart is down here, so it has arteries that are actually deoxygenated blood. But once again, we'll talk about the Osteichthyes circulatory system next week. What do you say? So let's stop there. Let's look at your lab.